Well, once again, we're revisiting Amasa. Ralph said Amasa. I was talking with a Jewish friend of mine, and she says, "Oh, Amasa, Amasa. You got the accent on the wrong syllable." Well, we always called it Amasa around here. That's what I always heard. So I went to Cruden's Concordance, the Bible, I think, with pronouncing, and I find a long A, Amasa. So take your pick. Whatever you call him, he has been a matter of interest in North Brookfield historical concerns for some time, going back to the big celebration of what was it, 87? The brochure, which 175th anniversary issue, Happy Birthday North Brookfield, and it has Amasa Walker and his brother Freeman, and a very nice little article in there on that, and that goes back to whatever it is, 15 years ago. Even more recently, this society had a talk by high school senior Matthew Adams. This was in 1999 in celebration of his 200th birthday. Walker, not not the high school seniors. And so it was Wednesday, May 26th in the Episcopal Church of North Brookfield at 7:30 p.m. We're running a little late. But Matthew Adams was nice enough to do all my work for me. He found a lot of material in our historical museum, and was sorted it out to some extent, and put it up on these posters, which we can look at from time to time. Perhaps you picked up a little curriculum vitae that I put together a while back on it. Matthew did it also. He has the picture of Amasa Walker, suitable for framing if you want to take one, and then a little material on him that came from that. Well, we're here to celebrate, I guess, one of North Brookfield's most distinguished, and I really mean that, distinguished citizens. And like most distinguished citizens from North Brookfield, now I'm thinking of George M. Cullen, Jeanette Howland. They were not born in North Brookfield. They come from somewhere else. And Brother Walker is no exception. He was born in Woodstock, Connecticut, just over the state line, not really too far. His father was a deacon and a farmer and a blacksmith. And somewhere just shortly after the birth of Amasa, they moved up to North Brookfield and bought the place where the Walker house is today at the corner of Mount Pleasant Street. Only that time the lot that they bought amounted to some 5 acres, and it cost $500, so you can see it's a pretty expensive piece of land there. This poster here that Matthew Adams put together shows many old pictures of the Walker house, and a recent photograph of the stone that is out there with the initials AW on it. I suppose that's to step up into a carriage. And there's a map here of the Amasa Walker house by Philip Walker, who was a great-grandson of our hero tonight. So just following along in the curriculum vitae here, he grew up in North Brookfield, went to the Center District School. I suppose that was the one down in the lower village at that time, 1901 to 1916. The old meeting house, of course, down in the lower village. Father's farm, up off of Mount Pleasant Street. And it mentions Lester. Part of his work was sticking card teeth for the Pliny Earl in Leicester, which I guess Pliny Earl was providing employment for people all over Worcester County. Then he got into the storekeeping business and worked for Captain Moses Bond, again down in the lower village. And we think he learned the storekeeping trade pretty well. He tried to continue his education preparatory to entering Amherst College, but he never quite made it to college. He studied with Reverend Thomas Snell, and as I mentioned, William Cullen Bryant was one of his fellow students there. He did teach school for a while, but when he was 21 years old, he bought a store in Brookfield, down in the West Brookfield area, what becomes West Brookfield. And he started out with $136 of his own money and about $650 borrowed from his father, blacksmith. Deacon Walter got a good press too. His funeral oration that the Reverend Snell gave really said he was a fine businessman and a pillar of the church. So Father helped out young Amasa, and 3 years later he sold out the business for $3,550. And if you do the math, it works out to an annual compounded return of 65% a year. So Captain Bond really must have taught him how to run a store. And he worked in manufacturer's agent, moved to Boston in a boot and shoe business. He knew, probably from his North Brookfield roots, he knew the boot and shoe business. And he had a partner, Charles Carlton, whose sister, Emmeline, that he married. But unfortunately, the Emmeline and a daughter, also Emmeline, died within the year. And from that time, he went into business for himself and began a career of public service. And that's really why we honor him today, his public spirited nature. And Secretary of the Lyceum, the adult education program at the time. The Lyceums were in practically every town in New England, and they provided lectures and activities for adults perhaps on a subscription basis, perhaps open to the public. And just as a side note, he was an active supporter of the anti-Masonic Party, which in late 1920s, early 30s did have some following people who thought that the lodge was getting too much involved in politics. 33 years old, he's president of the Lyceum and a director of the Franklin Bank. And it's a rather interesting, if you look in the list of banks in Massachusetts, this is 1832 now that he's a director. If you look in the 1835 listing, which is the only one that I have, you'll see that the Franklin Bank has failed. And in those days, the directors became responsible to the holders of the banknotes. In those days, banks weren't so much banks of deposit with checking accounts. The banks issued the paper currency of the time, paper notes that were promises to pay the gold and silver coins and redeemable at the bank in gold and silver. And when a bank failed, the shareholders of the bank not only lost their investment, but they were responsible to the holders of the banknotes to an amount equal to the par value of their investment. It was kind of a double jeopardy thing. You lose your investment, and then the court can order you to pay as much again into a referee in bankruptcy of some sort to, and the holders of the bills can then redeem them. So this probably taught him the lesson that he was to preach all the rest of his life. Hard money. This idea of banknotes, what he called later a mixed currency, partially supported by gold and silver, but largely supported by commercial credit. He felt that it was just subject to bad news. It would expand and contract at just exactly the wrong time. When business was poor, the money supply would contract and make business poorer. When business was good, the money supply would increase, just backed up by loans to the business community, and inflation would set in and prices would skyrocket. So you'll see this theme coming out through all of his future life. He got involved in all of the progressive movements of the time: anti-slavery, temperance, women's rights, and what is closest to his heart was probably the peace movement. We think of the peace movement as something dating out of the 1960s, but it was very strong as one of the progressive liberal movements of the early 19th century, largely influenced, I would imagine, by prominent Quakers. Not that there were so many Quakers in New England, but those who were pretty smart people and pretty outspoken people. I'm thinking of John Greenleaf Whittier and Lucretia Mott, probably. But anyway, William Lloyd Garrison is publishing his newspaper, The Liberator. Walker is involved with this, and by now he's 35 years old and he gets married again. Anna Ambrose of Concord, New Hampshire. The Ambrose, looking through various genealogical material that is in the treasure trove in our library, Ambrose's name kind of stuck out, and there were several generations of Stephen Ambrose, and one of my little projects is to try to get in touch with the present Stephen Ambrose, the historian and plagiarist, and see if he is related to, in any way, to the Walkers of North Brookfield. Perhaps he is. Yeah. Very early on, he got involved with the railroad as a Boston businessman. Oh, let's take one other thing while we're thinking of a Boston businessman. Here. This is a reproduction of the Massachusetts Spy, published in Worcester, January 1838. And the publisher is John Milton Earl, whose name probably the people from Leicester will recognize. And he does say this is January, and it says Worcester, first month, the Quaker way, parentheses, January 3, 1838. And down in the advertisement section of the front page, Spear and Mudge Incorporated, Spear, Mudge and Company, commission merchants and wholesale dealers in paper, shoes, and cards, 21 South Charles Street, Baltimore, Maryland. Reference to Mr. Robert Earl of Worcester and Messrs. Amasa Walker and Company of Boston. So the Spear Mudgeon Company is advertising in the Worcester paper and quoting the Earls and the Walkers as references to recommend you to their custom. So he's sponsoring a railroad with the Western Railroad, which landed in Worcester about 1834 and is being extended on to Albany. He's part of that group. And again, we see he's chairman of the Bowdoin Street. That's up near City Hall in Boston, Young Men's Peace Society. And in 1837, he's a director of the Western Railroad, and he's in charge of the Massachusetts Peace Society convention, but Garrison and he didn't get along in many ways. And so we see him with the Boston Temperance Society. He's off to St. Louis, advocating a railroad going from Albany to the, of course, Boston, Albany, and onto the Mississippi Valley, the competition for the Erie Canal. And by 1840, he's 41 years old. He's made it, at least enough to retire from business. Still involved in politics, campaigned for the Whig candidate. The Whig Party grew out of the anti-Masons, which he was involved with, and then a branch of the Democratic Party, the so-called Democratic Republican Party, the group that call themselves National Republicans, as distinguished from the Orthodox Democrats. Yeah, he says it's ill health. He spends a little time in Florida, but he's taught himself enough economics, they called it political economy in those days, to get a job at the new Oberlin College, which he was one of the founders. That's in Ohio. Back to North Brookfield in 1843, but then he moved on to London as a delegate with the American Peace Society at the International Conference in London. That International Peace Conference in 1843, that's the one they made the women and Lucretia Mott sit up in the balcony and wouldn't let them talk. They could just stay as observers. And it got them kind of angry. However, Walker did go along with it, but he redeemed himself a little bit later, and we might come to that in a little bit. So he's one of the founders of the Liberty Party. This is the party in favor of the abolition of slavery. He's involved in all these different radical fringe parties of that. The house that was built in 1810, where did we have that? You're all familiar with it, but where's the best picture of it? It's this one up here. The original house is the section in the center with the barn in back. He added on the front section, which is the one that is so obvious from the street today. So the original house goes back to 1801, but this house, or 1810, I guess it was. So this is an addition made 30 years later and in a completely different style of architecture. Well, the Liberty Party didn't work out very well, so it kind of was merged into another more prominent party, the Free Soil Party, which really had a national constituency with a presidential nominating convention in Buffalo in 1848 and nominated Martin Van Buren, Democrat, but anti-slavery Democrat. And Van Buren didn't win. It was good old General Zachary Taylor who won that one, so the Whig candidate. But Walker got his post that he ran for. He was elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and then a year later to the state Senate. He moves fast, a little bit faster than Steve Brewer. Yeah. And a couple of the laws that he was particularly involved with, I mentioned here, to have the sealed ballot. Before that, everybody knew who you were voting for. You would put it up. But he felt it was, as of course correctly, much more democratic to have the sealed ballot where it's privately, your choice is private to yourself. And he helped make Webster's Dictionary the standard reference in Massachusetts schools. Working with the, you'll see over here, he was working with Horace Mann, who was the first Massachusetts Commissioner of Education, and really put the good school system of Massachusetts on the map. This is for the election of 1852, and Horace Mann is running for governor, and Amasa Walker for lieutenant governor. They lost. They lost to the Whig candidate, whose name I've forgotten. Oh yes, the little item of personal interest. In 1850, he read a paper to the New England Historic Genealogical Society. The paper was called Old New England Customs, Manufacturers of the Household, with the subtitle, The Tale of a Coat. And that paper, The Tale of a Coat, was rewritten in the latter part of the 20th century by Emily Tchaikovsky as Amasa Walker's Splendid Garment. It tells, you've probably all seen a copy of it. It's over in the library if you haven't. I think they might even have some for sale over there. The early ways, the early 19th century way of providing clothing for the family. Turning the cowboy wool was eventually turned into a coat, and the long process that it took, as contrasted to the 1850s, where textile machinery is the biggest industry in Massachusetts, and textile and the textile machinery is the biggest industry, and the clothes are ready to wear. You can go right into Ware Pratt and buy a coat right off the shelf. Well, he's elected Secretary of State in 1851. In 1852, he ran for lieutenant governor. Didn't make it, but by now he's got a reputation for himself and he gets an honorary Master of Arts degree at Middlebury College in Vermont. He met Elihu Burritt in London at that peace conference, and Burritt, I think, was, if I'm not mistaken, from Stirling, and he was called the learned blacksmith. Kind of Walker's father was, of course, a blacksmith. Elihu Burritt, again, a peace activist, but as a learned blacksmith, I think he taught himself several languages. I mean, languages like Chaldean and Aramaic, and was one of the great great minds of the middle 19th century. And they started the Worcester Peace Society and served in the state constitutional convention as chairman of the Committee on Suffrage. Who can vote? Who can vote in Massachusetts? And Matthew Adams was sharp enough to dig up the report of the Committee on Suffrage, and they strongly advocated that women be allowed to vote. It died in the committee, though, that proposal. It didn't make it into the constitutional conventions. And just as a sideline, he was one of the petitioners who founded the Union Congregational Church, the ancestor of the Episcopal Church that we are in today. And I think that would be a whole additional field of study, just to see how the certain members of the Congregational Church became disaffected with the issues of the time, slavery certainly one of them, perhaps the most important, and they started a separate Congregational Church, schismatic, and made the Congregational Church take the name First Congregational Church in order to distinguish it. He was involved in the North Brookfield Savings Bank, the organization of that. By this time, the Batchelor Shoe Company is installing machinery. This is the 1854, and the owner of the at the time of the house that I live in, Alvin Adams, was the chief mechanic and chief engineer, I guess we call him, clerk, works manager, perhaps, for that. So that's just a little personal matter. But a lot of people in North Brookfield are now earning wages, industrial wages, and they need a place to put it. The distinguished and let's say upper class, kind of a word I hate to use, but more thoughtful people of the time felt it was necessary to start a savings bank. We don't want to encourage or make it possible for these workers to spend all their money on strong drink. Let's give them a nice, safe place to put it, because if we don't give them a means of saving this money, why, the first thing you know, they'll spend it all, and then they'll become sick, and they'll want health benefits, or they'll become too old, and they'll want pensions. Well, we'll put a stop to that right now by starting a savings bank and encouraging thrift among the working people. And in that same year, he's a lecturer at Amherst College. So he's lectured at, he's got a degree from Middlebury, he's lectured at Oberlin, and he's lecturing at Amherst, where he had hoped to go. Well, in 1857, he began writing a series of magazine articles on the total series. This was in early 1857, and it was a book called The Nature and Uses of Money and Mixed Currency, with a history of the Wickabog Bank. These 4 articles on the nature and uses of money were the magazine article, and the history of the Wickabog Bank was just a chapter attached to it, which sort of, there was never a Wickabog Bank, he tells us. It was, it's just a hypothetical bank, as a bank might have been organized, flourished for a while, and then come to disaster because of the matter of mixed currency. He's still on that theme. And those magazine articles were put together in this little booklet. again published in the fall of 1857, and published there, and between the magazine articles and the book, it really brought him to national attention. He, in a sense, he predicted the panic of 1857 with many bank failures and bankruptcies of business, because just the money supply contracted, and just wasn't any money to pay the debts. So this book really brought him to national attention, and the principles that he uses, that in hard times money should expand, interest rates should be lower, money should expand; in prosperous times money should be cut back with higher interest rates. That's just exactly what Allen, Greenspan, and the Federal Reserve system are doing today. Amasa Walker was somewhat ahead of his time. He's still in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. He's working to revise the banking laws to try to put the banking system on a strong basis, and just as a little sideline, he helps eradicate an epidemic of pleuropneumonia among the cattle of Massachusetts. They were apparently a lot of sick cows at that time. He's a member of the Federal Electoral College in 1860, is happy to cast his vote for Abraham Lincoln. The Civil War breaks out, of course, as a result of Lincoln's election, and Amasa Walker is of two minds. I mean, he's the peace advocate. He's the president of or one of the former presidents of the Massachusetts Peace Society, and he's a staunch anti-slavery Catholic, and it looks like this matter of slavery is bringing on a war. And which road do you take? And he vacillated for several months before he really came out in support of putting down the insurrection. I guess it was the attack on Sumter and the disaster at Bull Run in July of '71. He by this time he was, of course, married to Hannah Ambrose. He has two sons who served nobly in the Civil War. The oldest was Robert, and he became captain of infantry, fought at Fort Donelson. He was wounded, captured, spent some time in Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia, and before they could be moved to Andersonville, Georgia, he was exchanged. So he did come back home, and his mother he said he was going to go back, but he was too sick to it. And there's literature reports in the Historical Society of his mother's encouraging him to go back, but he doesn't. He goes to work for Baxler and the Baxler Shoe Company, and flourishes in that. Oldest daughter Emma married Alfred Baxler's, Ezra Baxler's son. So we've got a couple of Walkers closely involved with the Baxler Shoe Company. Francis Amasa studied law for a while, and became an officer in the Army, and served mostly as adjutant general in various divisions. First in General Couch's, and then in Burnside's Corps. Never really got involved in fighting, but they also serve are lawyers for the Army. He was elected to finish a term of a federal representative from Massachusetts who died, and he just served perhaps from November of '62 until the term ended in March of '63. But he, while he was there, he's was a rather significant individual for a short-time freshman congressman. And there, somewhere, I'll find you. Here we are. A couple of his speeches were such, or have survived in printing. I suppose they're in the congressional record somewhere. But this is February 18th, 1863, the speech of Honorable Amasa Walker of Massachusetts on the indemnity bill, and that is involves the causes of the Civil War, and he really feels that the Civil War is well, the headline here, cotton, not slavery, but slavery as a result of the actual world monopoly that the southern states had on the production of cotton. The amount grown in Egypt and India was just about enough for their own purposes. For the rest of the world depended upon on our southern states. And Amasa Walker, in his speech here, puts forth the theory that the cause of the Civil War was the attempt by the South to maintain the cotton slave system as for their profits on cotton, and if the free people, free citizens were allowed, if slavery was abolished, free citizens would come in and be growing cotton, and would hurt the profits of the major cotton producers of the South. The other talk, national finances, speech of, what's today, January 15th, 1863, and he's speaking in favor of a system of financing the Civil War on a borrowing basis. Surely they would have to borrow and create a national debt, which was very small at the beginning of the war, but he wanted a system of taxation which would fund and pay off that debt within a very reasonable time. That didn't happen. His speech was lost by the traditional Democrats, the Salmon Chase, who pretty much funded the Civil War on credit and by organizing national banks, again with a mixed currency. His bête noire, and felt that he was quite disappointed that his situation didn't prevail. So what does he do? He's he doesn't run again for re-election, and he starts writing a book. And he ends up with his magnum opus here, The Science of Wealth. Published first in 1866, went through 8 editions, including one in Italian. It was translated into Italian. We always think of Italy as in Renaissance Italy, late Middle Ages, as the place where modern capitalism started and modern banks. And I guess somebody in Italy thought so too, because they translated his book, in which he gives a nice passing nod to the Bank of Venice and congratulates them on their hard money policies. But this book became a standard text for several years, and it's a little out of date now, but still has some pretty interesting things in it. And I might just mention he made copious uses of charts of different kinds. I don't know if you can see that one there. Chart number 4, showing the different tariffs of the United States to the corresponding consumption of foreign merchandise. And as the tariff comes down, the foreign imports increase. And then they drop when the tariff goes up, and then they increase again when the tariff goes down. So he's tracking these interplay of economic forces very strongly. And the rest is goes rather quickly. Universal Peace Union, another short-lived attempt to, well, I wonder how short-lived it was. From the end of Napoleon to the 100 years, from 1815 to 1914, we have the Crimean War and the Franco-Prussian War, and that's about it. It was an era of a Spanish-American War. Oh yes, we've got to get in that one too, haven't we? Yeah, and apart from our own civil conflict, it was really an era of European peace anyway. So we have the Science of Wealth being published. He gets an honorary degree of Doctor of Laws from Amherst College, so he can call himself doctor. He was always called professor. I gathered that in many of throughout his career and in North Brookfield, he was always Professor Walker. And he passed away in 1875 at the age of 76. His obituaries are glowing. This one here is just the beginning of his obituary in the New York World, November 1st, 1875. And it does go on to list many articles, in magazine articles, which he wrote. And a little project in the back of my mind is to try to find them and put together a list of the writings of Amasa Walker, and maybe we could find copies of them. To that end, I'm very happy to contribute this book on the nature and uses of money, the 1857 book, as a companion piece to the 1866 book, which I didn't mention, and I should, was donated to the Historical Society here by Truth Crooks and Harold Crooks. So we'll try to find some more. And I'd like to close with the little note of his obituary in the North Brookfield Journal, the Thursday, November 4th. Within 2 weeks of this town has been called upon to mourn the death of two of our oldest and most honored townsmen, Colonel Pliny Nye and the Honorable Amasa Walker. So Pliny Nye, who I guess involved with the North Brookfield Railroad and the Savings Bank, among other things, published a map of North Brookfield, died of paralysis Saturday morning, October 3rd, at the advanced age of 84 years. One brief, for Colonel Nye, he was a perfect encyclopedia of useful knowledge, a successful businessman and retired from active business. And Professor Walker gets the rest of the obituary. Professor Walker, as he was generally called upon us, died suddenly October 29th, age 76. In him we feel we have lost a personal friend. And he did contribute to the North Brookfield Journal, and the same issue that carried his obituary carried his last published work. And it's not too long. I'd like to read it because it's kind of funny. It's headlined, "The First Missionary Contribution in the North Parish of Brookfield." It was somewhere, I think, about 1810 that the Reverend Thomas Snell, he was not doctor then, conceived the idea of taking up a collection in his church, meeting house it was called then, in behalf of a mission that had recently been established in India, but about which few had any definite knowledge. Mr. Snell was a warm friend of temperance, a cause which had begun to attract attention about that time, so he resolved to aid both the good objects at the same time, and therefore prepared a sermon upon the evils arising from the excessive use of intoxicating drinks. To obtain the necessary data in regard to the amount of liquor consumed in his own parish, he inquired of the traders how much they sold of all kinds of liquors, and found the gross amount per annum to be 4,000 gallons, a most appalling amount considering that the population was then only about 900. Having prepared himself, he surprised his congregation one Sabbath by a sermon in which he depicted the great evils of excessive drinking and urged the necessity of more temperate use of ardent spirits. He did not propose as desirable that they should abstain totally. That idea had not been entertained at all and would have been deemed absurd and impracticable. After presenting his subject, he went on to say that a mission had been established that needed support, and he thought if his hearer would spend less for rum, they might make liberal contributions for this object. And he proposed then and there to ask each man what he thought he could save and was willing to give for this purpose. He finished his discourse, and then looking around upon his congregation said, "Deacon Adams, how much can you save?" The deacon, who was a tall man, rose in his pew, which was in the broad aisle, and replied, "Reverend sir, I think I could save $2. The minister wrote it down. Yeah. "What can you save, Lieutenant Bond?" Or Deacon Haskell, Squire Hale, Deacon Walker, and so on through the entire audience. Only one man demurred or entered any kind of a protest to this way of raising money, and that was the famous old schoolmaster Rufus Dodge. When asked how much he could save, he replied, "I will give 50 cents, but I think it's a novel way of taking up a contribution." The result of the operation was that nearly $20 was obtained, an enormous sum in the estimation of everybody, to be given away for the benefit of heathens on the other side of the globe. October 1875. Yep. One other little piece of Amasa Walker's writing that rather touched me, I'd like to read to you also. Let's see, let's pull this out here. Now I can read it right from here. This is a short letter, just one small page of paper, to my grandson, Master Amasa Walker. Grandson Amasa was the son of the oldest son, Robert Walker. My dear boy, I want to see you very much, for it is a great while since I left home. I hope you are well and will have a good time on playing with your horse and other fine things. Grandpa hopes to come home again in the spring, and then we will play and tell stories and sing Old Boston and go out in the garden and have a fine time of it. Your affectionate grandfather, Amasa Walker. And with that, I'll have these here and you can take a look at them. And thank you for the thank you.
Clarence, can you just give us a little word about various sources? There is...
Oh yeah, I should mention that. These posters put together by Matthew Adams draws very heavily upon a box maybe about the size of this lectern that was sent to the North Brookfield Public Library on November 9th, 1993, and it's addressed to whom it may concern. In clearing up some old estate matters, I came across this Walker scrapbook, and it is a scrapbook apparently kept by Philip Walker, great-grandson, the son of the Amasa, whose letter we just read there, the grandson Amasa, and it says the scrapbook. There may be some material in it, such as some old colored postcards of North Brookfield, and that was the least of it, yeah, which may be suitable for archival storage. Realizing that for many years the Walker family and shoe factory were important in the town, your library seems a logical place for any material in the scrapbook you might wish to keep. Anything else, please dispose of. And I take it nothing was disposed of. This might have been a material in addition to the scrapbook, the newspaper clippings, photographs. And it says, yours truly, Judith A. Walker, Guilford, Connecticut. Now, Judith was, as it speaks of the shoe factory, Walker family and shoe factory, probably she was a descendant, I'm guessing, of Freeman Walker, our Amasa's brother, who went into the shoe business for himself, probably in competition with the bachelors. But anyway, there was a lot of Philip Walker's material in there. The Amasa grandson was in the publishing business. One of the big book publishers, I forget which one right now, Harper Brace or one of those big ones, and his son Philip, who we have a delightful little picture with long curls and in a dress, probably born about 1900. Amasa was born in was married in 1898 to a socialite in Lexington, but there's some pictures of her up here too. So come out and take a look at them. Yeah.
Apparently they had quite a vision with all the immigrants coming in. They all need shoes.
Well, slaves needed shoes too. That was a big part of the original bachelor business was slave shoes, and that was one of the falling out of the split up of the Congregational Church was over slavery. Should we provide shoes for them, or should we be making money by encouraging the slave trade? Is this a big market for us that we have to keep, or are we willing to lose this market? Not realizing that if the slaves became free and became gainfully employed, they'd be buying much more shoes, many more shoes, and of a better quality than the ones that were being made in North Brookfield in the 1850s. Yes, Steve? Well, come up and take a look at this stuff. This is only part of it, but it seems to be the most salient in connection with Amasa water. Other raw material goes on to the third and fourth generations.
Good job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Good job. Okay, thank you, Joe.